In 1935, a widowed grandmother named Helen Baker lived alone in a tiny Kansas farmhouse, surviving on just $11 a week. She stretched a single pot of beans across the week, baked her own bread for pennies, and never wasted a scrap. Her neighbors did the same, mending clothes, bartering eggs for flour, and heating only one room all winter. These were not acts of desperation. They were skills passed down through generations, born of necessity and honed by the Great Depression. Today, we've forgotten most of these habits. Convenience has edged out thrift. Factory bread cost less than homemade, central heating made one-room living unnecessary, and cheap clothes replaced mending. But the wisdom of Helen Baker and her generation still holds value. In this video, we uncover 25 forgotten frugal habits that seniors living alone used to survive and thrive on $11 a week. These are the lessons our grandparents knew by heart, waiting to be rediscovered. Number 1. Stretch one pot of beans across a whole week. A single pound of dried beans, simmered with salt pork or a ham bone, became Monday's supper, Tuesday's fried cakes, Wednesday's soup, and Thursday's mash. Why did it fade? Because canned beans and cheap fast food offered instant convenience, and slow-cooked beans came to be seen as poverty food. Number 2. Poverty meals: milk toast, potato soup, bread pudding. These weren't recipes, they were survival strategies. They stretched cheap staples into filling meals with just milk, bread, or a few potatoes. After the war, processed foods shoved these humble dishes aside, and they came to be seen as markers of shameful poverty. Number 3. Make one chicken into 3 meals. A frugal cook would first roast the bird, eating the best parts. Then she'd pick every scrap of leftover meat for a hash with potatoes and onions. Finally, the carcass and bones went into a pot with water, simmered for hours to make a nourishing broth, stretched with barley or noodles. This thrift faded as supermarkets sold cheap boneless chicken and single-use broths. Time-pressed cooks abandoned the 3-meal ritual, forgetting that one bird could still feed a solo senior for days. Number 4. Bake your own bread for pennies a loaf. A 5-pound sack of flour, a little salt, yeast, and water. That was all. Grandmothers made 2 loaves a week for mere cents, kneading by hand in the early morning before the stove was lit. But by the 1950s, factory-sliced bread became cheaper and more convenient. Baking at home came to seem like unnecessary labor, a rustic chore best forgotten, leaving the warmth of a homemade loaf behind. Number 5. Save every drop of bacon grease for cooking. When meat was a luxury, bacon fat became a staple, used to season beans, fry potatoes, or spread on bread. By the 1950s, vegetable shortening and margarine were cheaper and more convenient, turning saved drippings into a messy, old-fashioned habit. Many seniors recall how it made everything taste a little better. Number 6. Eat the cheap cuts butchers gave away: liver, tongue, oxtail. In the 1930s, a butcher would practically give these away. A senior living alone could simmer oxtail for hours into a rich, nourishing broth, or fry liver with onions for pennies a meal. But after the war, prosperity made these cuts low class. Factory farms made muscle meat cheap, and convenience foods promised ease. Slowly, the knowledge of coaxing tenderness from a tough oxtail or seasoning liver so it wasn't bitter, that wisdom faded from our tables. Number 7. A tiny porch or windowsill garden, even in old age. Seniors with limited mobility grew a few pots of tomatoes, peppers, and herbs on a sunny porch or windowsill, saving pennies by avoiding store-bought produce. This practice faded as supermarkets offered cheap, uniform produce year-round, and apartment life often lacked porch space. Growing your own food became seen as a necessity of poverty rather than a virtuous skill. Number 8. Can and preserve in single-jar batches so nothing spoils for one. Grandmothers processed just 1 or 2 jars at a time in a water bath canner, using older produce from their gardens. This hands-on method prevented waste but required constant attention. It faded as refrigeration improved and supermarkets offered cheap canned goods year-round, making the ritual seem unnecessary. Why it faded? Mass production made canning cheap enough to buy, not make. And the single-jar batch felt old-fashioned when everyone had a refrigerator and a corner grocery. The practice was edged out by convenience. It simply wasn't worth the steam and sweat anymore. Number 9. Forage-free food. Every ditch and vacant lot was a pantry. Dandelion greens, wild berries, even purslane, gathered without a penny. But wild foods came to be seen as poverty fare. When supermarkets spread and canned goods cheapened, foraging faded, edged out by convenience and the sting of looking low class. Number 10. Powdered milk and day-old discount bread. A senior living alone could stretch her budget by reconstituting dry milk at half the cost of fresh and buying baker's stale loaves for pennies. Soaking the hard bread in warm milk softened it into a filling meal. But by the 1950s, cheap, fresh sliced bread and refrigerated milk became widely available, making powdered milk and stale loaves seem low-class and inconvenient. These habits faded not because they stopped working, but because convenience won out. Number 11. Heat only one room and close off the rest all winter. This was how a senior living alone stretched a single coal bucket into weeks. The kitchen became the center of life, cooking, eating, sleeping near the stove. Families sealed doorways with quilts and stuffed rags under thresholds. Why did this habit fade? Central heating made whole house warmth affordable. Zoning a single room came to feel cramped and old-fashioned, a reminder of hard times people preferred to forget. Number 12. Rise and sleep with the sun to save lamp oil and coal. Seniors living alone timed their days to daylight, rising at dawn and retiring at dusk. Kerosene was precious. Every hour of lamplight cost a penny they couldn't spare. Coal, too, was measured by the scuttle. This habit faded as electricity reached rural areas and cost of bulbs and power dropped. Young generations saw the sun schedule as backward, a reminder of poverty they wished to forget. Convenience won, and the natural rhythm of daylight was abandoned. Number 13. Never a dryer. Everything dried on the line. A widow's wash day began at dawn, hauling a heavy basket of wet clothes to the backyard line. She pinned each piece with care, letting the sun and wind do the work for free. The habit faded, not because dryers were better, but because they became affordable in the 1950s. Electric dryers promised convenience and saved time, and line drying came to feel old-fashioned, even if it was free. Number 14. Reuse wash water and catch rainwater. After washing clothes, the grey water would scrub floors or water the garden. Rain barrels at every downspout collected soft water for hair washing and fine laundry. When indoor plumbing became common, this cautious practice was seen as backward and even unclean. Modern detergents also made grey water harmful to plants, and city ordinances discouraged rainwater collection in many areas. Number 15. Make soap and cleaners from kitchen scraps. Grandmothers saved every bit of fat from cooking, bacon grease, beef tallow, and mixed it with lye leached from wood ashes. The result was a harsh but effective soap for laundry and dishes. Vinegar from fermented fruit scraps cleaned windows and surfaces. This practice faded as mass-produced soaps became cheap and widely available in the 1920s and 30s. Procter & Gamble and Lever Brothers sold uniform bars for pennies. Homemade soap was seen as old-fashioned and low-class, associated with poverty. By the 1950s, most seniors bought their soap from the store. Number 16. Shop only the markdown shelf and closing time markets. Seniors would arrive at produce markets just before closing, when vendors slashed prices to clear perishables. They'd fill baskets with slightly overripe fruit, wilting greens, and day-old baked goods, all perfectly edible at a fraction of the cost. This habit faded as supermarkets standardized pricing and reduced sections became tucked-away afterthoughts. Meanwhile, the rise of fixed-price chain stores and strict sell-by dates made closing-time bargains rare and made hunting them feel low-class, even though thrift had once been wisdom. Number 17. Barter with neighbors instead of buying. In tight-knit communities, a widow might trade a dozen eggs for a neighbor's repair work. Everyone had skills, no cash needed. But as supermarkets and dollar stores spread, convenience nudged barter aside. Why haggle when you could just buy? The old habit faded, buried beneath aisles of affordable goods. Number 18. Mend, darn, and re-sew the same clothes for decades. A single shirt might be patched at the elbows, re-hemmed 3 times, and darned at the collar before finally being cut into rags. This habit faded when cheap factory clothing made replacing easier than repairing. By the 1960s, mending seemed old-fashioned, a sign of poverty best left behind. Number 19. The cash envelope system. Every dollar was divided into envelopes labeled food, coal, rent, and so on. When the envelope was empty, spending stopped. No credit, no exceptions. The practice faded when the first credit cards arrived in the 1950s, promising convenience. Using cash felt slow and backward. But for those who remembered the Depression, cash was trust. Credit was a gamble they couldn't afford. Number 20. Walk everywhere. Owning a car was unthinkable. Seniors walked to the store, church, and doctor, no matter the weather, often several miles a day. A car cost more than a month's rent and was seen as an unnecessary luxury for those living alone. This habit faded as post-war prosperity made cars affordable and suburbs spread. Walking became associated with poverty or eccentricity, since even a used car offered freedom and convenience that walking could never match. Number 21. Home remedies before ever calling a doctor. Grandparents treated colds, coughs, and minor ailments with what they had on hand. Honey and lemon for sore throats, a mustard plaster for chest congestion, or a vinegar compress to break a fever. Calling a physician was a last resort, not only because money was scarce, but because doctors were few and far between in rural areas. This self-reliance began to fade as modern medicine became more accessible and affordable. The rise of penicillin and miracle drugs in the 1940s and 50s, combined with the spread of clinics and rural health programs, made professional care seem safer and more effective than old kitchen remedies. Convenience and trust in science quietly edged the old ways out. Number 22. Knit and quilt to sell for a little pin money. With a steady needle and a spare hour, a widow could turn scrap yarn into a warm scarf, or a worn shirt into a patchwork blanket. These handmade goods sold door to door or at local markets, bringing in just enough for sugar or lamp oil. But by the 1950s, factory-made blankets and store-bought sweaters became cheaper than the cost of materials and time. Handcrafts came to be seen not as thrifty, but as old-fashioned. The tradition faded, replaced by the convenience of mass production. Number 23. Take in a boarder or share a house to split costs. A widow with a spare bedroom would rent it to a single factory worker or a teacher. 3 meals a day were often included. The arrangement provided companionship and stretched a meager pension. After World War II, the rise of suburban privacy made sharing one's home seem low class. Purpose-built apartments also offered an alternative, so the practice faded, edged out by a new ideal of independence. Sharing a home meant dividing not just rent, but coal, flour, and loneliness. A teacher moving in could mean the difference between destitution and comfort. But as America grew wealthier, the privacy of one's own home became a status symbol. By the 1960s, taking in a stranger was often seen as a necessity to be hidden, not a prudent choice. Number 24. Save every string, jar, and button. Nothing was too small to keep, because when something broke, you fixed it with what you had. Buttons were cut from worn-out shirts, jars scrubbed clean for next year's preserves, every bit of twine coiled in a drawer. This habit faded not because thrift vanished, but because factory-made goods became so cheap that it cost more in time to save a button than to buy a dozen new ones. Reusing outlasted its own necessity. Number 25. Lean on the church and neighbors, a widow's safety net. After a husband's death, the church might leave a basket of preserves on the porch, or a neighbor would bring round a share of their stew. This fragile charity faded as congregational bonds loosened and privacy became prized. By mid-century, the old communal safety net had been replaced by impersonal government checks. Churches once served as informal social registries, matching widows with families who had extra. But the rising cult of self-sufficiency after the war made asking for help feel shameful. Convenience foods and new government aid quietly replaced the old reliance on one's community. And those are 25 forgotten frugal habits that let a senior living alone on just $11 a week not only survive, but live with dignity and without debt. Each of these practices was born of necessity, yes, but also of wisdom. They taught self-reliance, community, and a deep respect for the value of a penny. Over time, cheap factory goods and the rise of convenience pushed many of these habits aside. Who wants to boil every bone when a can of soup costs a nickel? Who has time to darn socks when a new pair is $1 at the 5 and dime? Slowly, this knowledge faded, not because it stopped working, but because the world moved on. Yet now, as we face rising costs and uncertain times, perhaps it's worth asking, which of these would you bring back?